My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 65 years old. For 16 summers, my grandson asked me the exact same question, every July, every August, without fail. He would stop in the middle of the pasture, point toward the old oak tree standing alone on the hill, smile at me, and ask, "Grandma, why did Grandpa plant that tree all by itself?" And every single year, I lied. Not once, not twice, for 16 years. Sometimes I told him the tree gave shade to the cattle. Another year, I said it protected the hillside from washing away after heavy rain. Once, I even told him his grandfather simply loved oak trees more than any other tree. None of those answers were true. The real answer had been hidden inside that tree since the day it was planted. And when my grandson finally discovered it, I thought I had failed the last promise I ever made to my husband. But to explain that, I have to go back many years. My husband, Thomas Carter, was the kind of man who could fix almost anything made of wood. He wasn't famous. He never owned a big company. He spent his life repairing barns, porches, church pews, old farmhouses, and sometimes even children's tree houses if a neighbor couldn't afford to pay someone else. When people in our county had a problem, they called Tom. His hands were always rough. There was usually sawdust on his boots and under his fingernails, even after church on Sundays. We were married for 41 years. People always asked us what the secret was. The truth is, there wasn't one. We simply chose each other every single day, even on the difficult days, especially on those. Our farmhouse wasn't anything special. An old white house with green shutters, a wraparound porch, a vegetable garden that always grew more tomatoes than we could ever eat. From the kitchen window, you could see almost the entire pasture, and right in the distance, that lonely hill. Every summer, our daughter Emily brought her son Liam to spend nearly 2 months with us. It became our tradition. No school, no city noise, no rushing anywhere. Just fishing in the pond, helping Grandpa repair fences, picking blackberries, watching fireflies after sunset. Liam loved every minute of it. And if Thomas was working, Liam was never more than a few steps behind him. If Tom carried a hammer, Liam carried a handful of nails. If Tom painted the barn, Liam insisted on painting the lowest boards himself, even if most of the paint ended up on his shoes. I used to watch them from the porch with a glass of lemonade. Sometimes they worked for an hour without saying more than a few words. They didn't need to. Love has a quiet language, and those two spoke it better than anyone I've ever known. Then, one afternoon, just a few weeks after Liam turned 5, Thomas drove home with a tiny oak sapling in the back of his old pickup truck. He didn't explain why he bought it. He simply carried it across the pasture, past the vegetable garden, past the pond, all the way to the highest hill on our land. He planted it there, completely alone. When he finished, he stood looking at it for a long time. That evening, while we were washing the dinner dishes together, I finally asked, "Tom, why did you plant it all the way out there?" He smiled, not at me, at the window, toward that tiny little tree. Then he quietly said something I didn't understand until 16 years later. Because one day, our grandson will come looking for the truth. For the next few years, that little oak tree hardly seemed important. It was just another tree in a pasture filled with fences, wildflowers, and long summer grass. Thomas never mentioned it again, not once. Life simply moved on. Every June, Liam would come running through the front door with a backpack almost as big as he was. The first thing he'd do was hug me. The second was run outside looking for Grandpa. By then, Thomas had already planned another little project. A birdhouse, a fishing dock, a fence that didn't really need repairing. He always found a reason to keep those little hands busy. He used to tell me, "A boy learns more holding a hammer beside his grandfather than sitting in front of a television." I think he was right. Liam grew taller every summer. At 6, he chased butterflies across the field. At 7, he insisted he was old enough to mow the lawn. At 8, Thomas finally trusted him to use a real hammer. He bent nearly every nail he touched. Tom never laughed. He would simply pull it out, hand him another one, and say, "Try again." That was the kind of man he was. He never made anyone feel small for learning. Then everything changed. Thomas began coughing. At first it sounded harmless, just a dry cough after working outside. We blamed the dust, the pollen, his age, but the cough stayed. Then came the doctor's appointments, the scans, the waiting. I'll never forget the afternoon we heard the words, "lung cancer." It felt as though every sound in the room disappeared. I wasn't listening anymore. I was watching Thomas. He didn't ask, "Why me?" He didn't get angry. He simply reached for my hand. The drive home was almost silent. About halfway back, he looked out the passenger window and quietly said, "I guess we won't get as many summers as we planned." That sentence hurt more than the diagnosis, because for the first time, I knew he had accepted it. Treatment gave us another 18 months. Some days were almost normal. Others were impossible. On the good days, Thomas still insisted on walking across the pasture, always toward that oak tree. By then it stood nearly 12 feet tall, strong, healthy, growing faster than either of us expected. Sometimes he would stand beside it with one hand resting against the trunk, not speaking, just standing there. One evening I finally asked, "What are you thinking about every time you come here?" He smiled. "The future." That was all he said. I thought he meant Liam. I thought he was simply imagining the boy growing up. Now I know he meant much more than that. A few weeks before his final hospital stay, Thomas asked Liam to help him out in the pasture. The boy was only 10 then. I watched them from the porch. They measured something around the oak tree with an old tape measure. Thomas pointed toward one of the lower branches. Liam nodded as though he understood every word. When they came back, I asked what they had been doing. Thomas winked at me. "Just making plans." I never asked another question. I trusted him. Maybe I trusted him too much, because a month later he called me into our bedroom after Liam had gone back home. He reached into the drawer of his nightstand and placed a small brass key in my hand. It was old, worn smooth around the edges. I had never seen it before. He closed my fingers around it. Then he looked me straight in the eyes. "Evelyn, one day Liam is going to ask about that tree again." "I know." "When he does, tell him nothing." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He squeezed my hand just hard enough for me to know how serious he was. "No matter how many times he asks, promise me you'll wait until he's 16. I stared at him. "Tom, what are you hiding?" He smiled. The greatest conversation I'll ever have with my grandson. Then he closed my hand around the key again. And it has to happen after I'm gone. I wanted to ask 100 more questions. Instead, I made him a promise that would become harder to keep with every passing summer. Thomas passed away that November. The first winter without him felt impossibly quiet. For 41 years, I had fallen asleep listening to the sound of him moving around the house, checking the doors, adding another log to the fireplace, whistling softly while making coffee before sunrise. Then one day, all of those little sounds were simply gone. The following summer, Liam came back to the farmhouse. He was 11, older, taller. But the first thing he did after dropping his backpack by the front door was exactly what he'd always done. He ran across the pasture toward the old oak tree. When he came back, he looked at me with those same curious brown eyes. "Grandma, why did Grandpa plant it all by itself?" For a moment, I almost told him. The promise weighed heavily on my heart. Instead, I smiled. "Your grandpa always said every pasture needed one tree big enough for birds to rest." Liam nodded. He seemed satisfied. For about 5 minutes. The next day, he asked again, "So, why that hill?" I laughed softly, because that's where the soil was strongest. Another lie. A harmless one. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Every summer became a little harder. When he was 12, he asked while we were fishing. When he was 13, he asked while helping me stack firewood. When he was 14, he asked during dinner. And every single time, I gave him a different answer. Eventually, he started smiling before he even asked. "You always change the story, Grandma." "I do?" "Last year you said Grandpa planted it for the birds." I pretended to think for a moment. Maybe I remembered it wrong. He laughed. "I don't think you did." That laugh stayed with me all evening, because I realized something. He no longer believed my answers. He was simply waiting for me to tell him the truth. One rainy afternoon, when Liam was 15, we sat on the porch watching the storm roll across the fields. The oak tree swayed in the wind, but it never bent very far. It had become enormous. Its branches stretched wider every year. Liam stared at it for a long time before speaking. "Grandma." "Yes?" "I think Grandpa planted it for me." My heart skipped. I tried not to show it. "What makes you think that?" He shrugged. "I don't know. It just feels like every time I come here, he still wants me to look at it." I looked at the tree, then at the old brass key lying inside the kitchen drawer. I had carried that secret for almost 15 years. Some nights I even dreamed about it, about opening whatever it unlocked, about breaking my promise. But every time I thought about it, I heard Thomas's voice. "Wait until he's 16. Nothing more, nothing less." The following spring, Liam called me himself. His voice sounded different, deeper, older. "Grandma, I turned 16 this July." "I know." "I'm coming for the whole summer." I smiled. "I'll make your favorite peach pie." He laughed. "And maybe," he paused, "this is finally the year you stop lying to me." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked through the kitchen window. The oak tree stood on the hill exactly where Thomas had planted it 16 years earlier. Stronger, taller, patient, almost as though it had been waiting too. For the first time in 16 years, I whispered the words I'd been repeating to myself since the day my husband handed me that little brass key. It's finally time. Liam arrived on the first Saturday in July. He had grown into a young man. His shoulders were broader. His voice was deeper. But when he stepped onto the porch and wrapped his arms around me, I still caught a glimpse of the little boy who used to run barefoot across the pasture with a pocket full of pebbles. We spent the first few days the way we always had, fishing before sunrise, picking blackberries along the fence, making homemade ice cream on the back porch. For a little while it felt as though nothing had changed, but I knew something had. The brass key was still hidden in the top drawer of my bedroom dresser, and every morning I woke up thinking, today might be the day. On the evening before Liam's 16th birthday, we sat together on the porch swing. The sun was sinking behind the fields, turning the sky orange and gold. He looked toward the oak tree. It towered over the pasture now, casting a long shadow across the grass. Without taking his eyes off it, he smiled. "So, is tomorrow finally the day?" I smiled back. "Yes." He looked at me, surprised. "No stories this time?" "No stories." He laughed. "I honestly thought you'd keep that secret forever." So did I. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the crickets and the wind moving through the cornfield across the road. Finally, I stood up. "I have something that belongs to you." Inside the house, I opened my dresser and carefully lifted out the small brass key. It looked even older than I remembered. Years of being held had polished the edges until they shone softly in the evening light. Liam turned it over in his hand. "What does it open?" "I've never known." His eyebrows lifted. "You never tried?" I shook my head. "No. Not even once?" "I promised your grandfather I wouldn't." He looked at me for a long moment. "I don't think I could have waited 16 years. I smiled sadly. There were days I didn't think I could either. The next morning was his birthday. We left the house just after sunrise. The grass was still wet with dew. Neither of us spoke much as we walked across the pasture. It felt almost wrong to fill that quiet with words. When we reached the oak tree, I stopped. "This is as far as I go." Liam looked confused. "Aren't you coming?" I gently shook my head. "Your grandfather wanted this part to be yours." He looked at the tree, then back at me. "What am I looking for?" "I honestly don't know." "Grandpa never told you?" "No." "He only told me to wait until you turned 16. Liam slipped the key into his pocket and slowly walked around the trunk. He ran his hand over the rough bark. Nothing. He searched the roots. Nothing. He checked every low branch. Still nothing. After nearly 15 minutes, he looked back at me and shrugged. "I think we're missing something." Just then, a ray of morning sunlight slipped through the branches. It caught a tiny piece of metal almost completely hidden beneath the bark, nearly 7 feet above the ground. Liam frowned. "Grandma, I think there's something up there." He climbed carefully, just as Thomas had taught him years before. A minute later, I heard his voice. "I found it!" For the first time in 16 years, My heart began to race. "I found it!" his voice echoed across the pasture. I took one step forward without thinking. Then I stopped. Thomas had been very clear. This part belongs to him. I stayed where I was. From the ground, I watched Liam carefully pull away a loose piece of bark. It wasn't nailed in place. It had been shaped years ago to fit perfectly against the trunk, and as the tree grew, the bark slowly concealed it until it became almost invisible. Behind it was a small metal compartment, no bigger than a lunchbox, protected from the weather, protected from curious hands, protected by time. Liam looked down at me. "The key fits." My throat tightened. "Then open it." The lock clicked, such a small sound, but after 16 years, it felt louder than thunder. Inside wasn't money. There were no gold coins, no legal papers, no hidden fortune. Instead, Liam slowly lifted out a weathered leather journal, then an old compass, a folding pocket knife polished from years of use, a faded photograph of Thomas holding Liam as a newborn beneath the very same oak tree when it was nothing more than a fragile sapling tied to a wooden stake. Finally, there was a bundle of envelopes, 16 of them. Each one had a single age written on the front. Age 1, age 2, age 3, all the way to age 16. Liam climbed down carefully, holding everything against his chest as though he were carrying something fragile. He sat beside me in the grass. Neither of us spoke. He picked up the last envelope, the one marked, "Open on your 16th birthday." His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the letter. For a long moment, he simply stared at the page. Then he began reading aloud. "If you're holding this letter, then your grandmother kept her promise." Liam stopped. He looked at me. I couldn't say anything. He smiled softly and continued. "She probably told you 100 different stories about this tree. None of them were true. Don't blame her. Every time she lied, she was keeping a promise she made to me. And if you know your grandmother the way I do, that promise cost her more than you'll ever understand." By then, my eyes were already full of tears. Liam kept reading. "I planted this tree the week you were born, not because I wanted to leave you something, but because I wanted you to grow up beside something that grows slowly. The world will spend your whole life telling you to be faster, finish school faster, earn money faster, become successful faster. But the strongest things God ever created almost always grow slowly." Liam lowered the paper for a moment. He looked up into the branches above us. The tree had stood through storms, through heavy snow, through scorching summers, never rushing, just growing. He unfolded the second page. "Every ring inside this tree marks another year of your life. While you were learning to walk, it was learning to stand. While you were learning to read, it was reaching toward the sky. And while you were becoming the man I hoped you would be, this tree was quietly becoming strong enough to protect what I left for you." Liam wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. I had seen him cry only once before, at his grandfather's funeral. He looked at the compass, the pocket knife, the journal, then back at the letter. There was still one page left. He unfolded it carefully. And as his eyes moved across the final lines, his entire expression changed. He looked at me with tears running freely down his face. "Grandma," his voice barely came out, I think Grandpa knew exactly who I'd become. I nodded. I think he did. Liam handed me the letter. Read the last part. I looked down at Thomas's familiar handwriting. The final words made my heart stop for just a moment. One day, you will have children of your own. When that happens, bring them back to this hill. Plant another oak beside this one, because love should never be inherited through money. It should be inherited through memories. I closed my eyes. After 16 years, I finally understood why Thomas had never told me what was inside the tree. Some gifts aren't meant to surprise everyone. They're meant to change one person forever. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The morning breeze moved gently through the branches above us, and the oak leaves made the same soft sound I had listened to for 16 summers. Liam closed the letter and held it against his chest. I spent years thinking Grandpa left me a secret, he said quietly. He did. But it wasn't what I expected. I smiled through my tears. What did you expect? He laughed softly. I don't know, maybe a treasure map, gold coins, something exciting. And what did you find instead? He looked back at the tree. I found him. That answer broke something inside me, not in a painful way, in the way your heart breaks when it's too full to hold one more emotion. We carried everything back to the farmhouse together. The journal stayed on the kitchen table for the rest of the afternoon. Page after page was filled with Thomas's handwriting. Some entries were only a few sentences long. Others stretched across several pages. They weren't instructions. They were stories. The first house he ever built, the day he met me, the mistakes he regretted, the lessons no school could teach. Every few pages he had written a question instead of an answer. What kind of man do you want to become? When was the last time you admitted you were wrong? Who would miss you if you disappeared tomorrow? Liam didn't rush through it. Sometimes he would read a page, close the journal, and sit quietly for 10 or 15 minutes before opening it again. Late that evening, just before sunset, he walked out onto the porch carrying the old compass. He turned it over in his hands. Grandma, yes? I finally understand why you never told me. I looked at him. If you'd told me when I was 10, I would have thought this was just an old box hidden in a tree, he smiled. But now, I think Grandpa spent 16 years teaching me patience without saying a single word. I nodded. That's exactly what he did. A year later, Liam left for college, but something had changed. He called every Sunday, not because he had to, because he wanted to. Sometimes he asked about the garden, sometimes about the old farmhouse, but every phone call ended the same way. How's our oak tree doing? Not the oak tree, our oak tree. 3 years later, he brought someone home, a young woman named Grace. Before dinner, he asked if we could take a walk. Without saying another word, the three of us crossed the pasture together. When Grace saw the great oak standing alone on the hill, she smiled. It's beautiful. Liam looked at me, then he looked at the tree. My grandfather planted it for me. There was pride in his voice, not because he had inherited something valuable, but because he finally understood why it had been left to him. Before they walked back to the house, he rested his hand against the trunk for a moment, exactly the way Thomas used to. I don't think he even realized he was doing it. Some habits don't come from imitation. They come from love. These days, I'm 70 years old. The farmhouse is quieter than it used to be. The porch swing still creaks. The tomatoes still grow faster than I can pick them. And every summer, I take my coffee outside just after sunrise. From my chair, I can still see that oak tree standing on the hill. It isn't lonely anymore, not to me. It's a reminder that the greatest things we leave behind are rarely money or property or possessions. Sometimes the greatest inheritance is simply giving someone the right lesson at exactly the right time. And every now and then, when the morning wind moves through those branches, I can almost hear Thomas laughing, as if he's standing beside that tree again, watching another generation grow. And I always smile, because after 16 years of keeping his promise, I finally understand it was never the tree protecting the secret. It was the secret that gave the tree its meaning.